Episode 5, Paul Laursen. Welcome to the Oxidative Potential Podcast, where we discuss all things sports science and performance. I'm your host, Matthew DeRoche, and with me is my fellow co-host, Phil Batterson. Enjoy. Good day, folks. On the podcast with us today is Paul Laursen. Super interesting conversation. Paul has been on both sides of the coin. He's spent a long time as a researcher, as a professor, and also a long time as a coach. And he's coached some fairly successful athletes, like world class, top of the podium athletes and triathlon. And he coaches quite a wide variety in endurance sport as well, right? Like whether it's running, cycling. So yeah, really good conversation. If you go check him out on ResearchGate, hundreds and hundreds of papers he's been a part of. The guy's really done some pioneering in the research realm of trying to uncover a lot of the stuff, whether it's with low carb, high fat. You know, there's just like get into like the beta hydroxybutyrate, cooling methods. Like there's so many. So you go look. Just go check it out on ResearchGate. It's crazy. So you can also find him on Twitter, Paul B. Laursen. You can find him on his website, paullaursen.com, and his other stuff that he's managing, like HIIT Science, right? So HIIT science.com. You can find his textbook that he has on science and application of high intensity interval training. You can probably find a link to his Instagram there, which it's the HIIT Science companies. So at HIIT Science Instagram. And also you can find out the software that he's now has up and running, which is called Athletica AI. So this is basically a software that goes and analyzes, whether it's for the coach or the athlete, the training data, and basically gives you basically a template of, you know, this is the type of high intensity interval training you should be looking at. This is, you know, the fitness level gained from, you know, whether it's the last block of training through the several cycles of training. So it's really kind of this pioneering field right now where we're seeing AI starting to be used to take the place of a lot of the objective measures that we spend time as coaches just gleaning over power data and heart rate data and all this stuff that just takes up and eats up so much time. So I encourage folks to, you know, look into this stuff, because I think you'll realize that a lot of the, you know, subjective stuff that you should be spending time on as a coach will get freed up by having a lot of this stuff taken care of by this type of software, right? So in the conversation, we talked about growing pains coming up as a coach. We talked about high intensity interval training, some of the applications that people might not know about, and also how it's been commonly used and maybe misunderstood that it's just this one thing. So we dig into that. We talk about Paul's stuff at the end, like his hobbies, ecology. It's just super interesting conversation. Really enjoyed having Paul on. He really does a good job at, you know, obviously he spent a long time as a professor, so he has a really good ability to break down stuff in such an easy manner, I guess. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. And cheers. We'll talk to you soon. So Paul, I gave you a brief introduction before the podcast started. But if you could just do a little short synopsis of, you know, where you're at now, your journey to there, essentially, so people can kind of understand where you're coming from when we're talking about what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on, Matt, and love what you guys are doing. And yeah, so I guess my journey. I'm coming to you now from British Columbia. I'm in the sleepy town of Revelstoke, which is like a little ski town, outdoor town in British Columbia, Canada. And I grew up in Vancouver, and my passion, growing up as a kid was I just loved sport, but it was triathlon that really took my attention. So and I was kind of in a stage where people thought triathletes were really crazy, and I got, you got a lot of attention for sort of doing them. So I took it to a certain level. Wanted to become basically like Simon Whitfield and winning Olympic gold for Canada. That was my dream. I spent way too long doing that, trying to do that. Failed miserably, and wanted to try to figure out why. Right,
Yeah.
so basically I said, okay, well, I'm going to study sports science and at least try to help others not do the same mistakes I did. So I went to UBC, did bachelor's, master's, got a PhD scholarship at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. And it was actually in the area. I'm sure we'll talk about it today. But it was in the area of high intensity interval training, and that's really sort of started me down that road. And the big question I really wanted to ask when I was doing my PhD down there was, what's the best session that I can do on any sort of given day? Like, there's lots of different ways you can do a high intensity interval training session, right? So I was like, well, and I was kind of a question whenever I'd go out on my, I was trying to do my own programming puzzle, trying to solve it for performance, and I could never really figure out, well, what do I do today, right? I didn't have there weren't any triathlon coaches back then, really. No one knew what they were doing. It's just like ride and run and swim big miles, and that was sort of the recipe for success. And obviously, we've come a long ways since then. But anyways, that took me down under for 20 years, actually, just about. I did 10 years in Australia, and it was around the time of the Sydney Olympics, and that's really when Aussies were kicking goals, so to speak, in sports science in the world. The AIS, if you've heard of the Australian
Yeah.
Institute of Sport, it's like a big hitter and stuff in the world, and that was one of the reasons why I went down under and accepted that scholarship, is because I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I just super mad passionate about performance and figuring things out from a physiological sort of standpoint. So did that, went down, I became a prof researcher in ECU in Perth, Australia. And that's really where I met my key colleague, Martin Bichette. And he came over, and really we sort of began our collaboration there in Perth. And we were really just trying to manipulate all the different factors in high intensity interval training to figure out what the effects were, positive or negative. And then because we just were mad passionate and we published so many papers in it, we got asked by the journal Sports Medicine to write a review on it, and we did a 2-part review in Sports Medicine. It's called it's high intensity interval training solutions to the programming puzzle. It's one of the most cited papers in our field, and then that attention caught the eyes of Human Kinetics. And Roger Earle asked us repeatedly if we would write a book on it. So we finally said yes, and had to time basically with returning back home. So the other thing that I did along the way was I led physiology for the New Zealand Olympic program for 2 Olympic cycles, and also did a lot of coaching. So just like we're really sort of we love that middle space between like the science in the lab, but also the application in the field. And that's really what we feel. There's a bit of a gap sometimes so we really sort of try to bridge that gap. Got back here to Revelstoke with my wife and daughter, and back to the family, and then now it's been all working on HIIT science, which is we try to teach the science and application of everything that we've learned along the way of high intensity interval training. So we've got a book and course on that. And then we're also working on a technology as well that basically tries to help out the practitioners and athletes to give them the best solution to the programming puzzle ultimately on any given day using machine learning and all of the information that's in our book and course. And that's about my wrap up, man.
No, that was great, because it really does give folks an understanding. And this is a common theme I hear with anyone I've had on so far, is through our own failures, we ended up trying to prevent that in others, right? Not very many people end up in the space of sports performance or exercise physiology in the long term that have been super successful themselves, right? You don't
Oh,
see
yeah.
many professional athletes turning over and really digging into the physiology. It's more so the people that have failed had to try and find answers for that and got lost in that. But no, that's great. So we'll kind of dig into that actually a little bit with we'll start with high intensity interval training. Um, you know, we know that this kind of started back in, I think it was 1960 with Ostrand and some of the stuff he did trying to uncover, like what is it that we're trying to get out of this? What are the different responses that we're going to see from these high intensity efforts, right?
That's
I can't
right.
remember. It's something called work. Something. Anyways, the papers lost me. But and then we moved off there and understood that there was different responses, to some of these shorter intervals. Like, oh, this micro interval thing. Like the French physiologist Bilat, right? She became fairly prominent with her 30-30 protocol and understood. Yeah, we actually do get some good gains here
Sure
from
do.
this 30-30, and we can spend more time here than we previously thought, maybe more so than some of these longer intervals. And also because of the difference in maybe lactate and heart rate being a certain elevation above VT2 or whatever in the severe domain, um, we're going to yield different adaptations, though these are all high intensity, right? Because lactate is going to be lower with some of these intensity intervals, vice versa, right? Higher in some of these. So, can you kind of lay out what is it that a lot of people miss when we're looking at high intensity interval training? Maybe even prevalent coaches out there, they just go and throw high intensity and don't really think much of it. They just look at it as it the same, you know, it's all the same, right?
That's right. That's right. And it's certainly not. There's, as Martin and I like to say, there's lots more than one way to skin a cat, but there's often a
Mm,
better way. And if you start to know how to push and pull the levers of HIIT, you really, it's really kind of a powerful tool. The typical way, like you just alluded to, that any coach is going to they kind of go about their craft it's quite simple, and it's just Tuesday's high intensity interval training day. You know what I mean?
mm,
And it's all this, they're all the same.
yeah.
That's actually not the way it has to be. You can actually be physiologically driven in your approach if you know how to move those levers. So, for example, and we kind of have to almost sort of start to think, well, what are the different responses that you could actually get from a high intensity interval training? Well, we try to break it down into three key targets or physiological responses. You can get an aerobic response, as you know, heart and lungs working. You can, as you just spoke on, you can get an anaerobic response and have lactate be high. Um, or you can also get a neuromuscular response. We also say neuromuscular or musculoskeletal response. Think of like a maximal recruitment that we see from these, or think about muscle soreness that you might have from a high intensity interval training session.
Mhm.
But you can have massively different degrees of those three physiological responses. And if you know how to move the levers, you could actually have a session that's at VO2 max in terms of totally maximizing your aerobic response, but have lactate quite low. And it's due to the Astran trick that you just alluded to. It's due to the fact that, in the short interval context where you're taking a pause and a break between the work bout, if it's done at the appropriate rate long enough, then it comes down to this muscle protein called myoglobin. And myoglobin resaturates quite quickly, and it forms it basically buffers any further glycolysis that's going to be going on, or anaerobic lactate kind of production. And we're going to actually you can have that HIIT session towards VO2 max, but be very, very aerobic and very low in the anaerobic response. Now you think of why that's important. Well, now you can, if you had just a like a low lactate type session, a low anaerobic session, Well, think of how much better you're going to feel the next day or following that. But you're still getting the adaptations in the large, fast twitch muscle fibers, and the heart as well, right? Think of the ventricular stretching that you're getting as well. But you can back that session up, because consistency of training day one to the next is what is really what it's all about. That gets you to way farther than if you just, no pain, no gain type HIIT session and you're just killing yourself. Well, we all know what happens there, right? Your next day, just you're in the bucket, and it's like you're not going to be kind of going too well. So yeah, this is what we teach with HIIT science, is we teach a better way to kind of go at a physiological targeting approach.
Yeah, that was that was nice that you mentioned myoglobin there, because I think a lot of people forget about myoglobin. We just did a quick review on Stefan van der Voort's muscle determinants, which he brought up very nicely about, differences in type 1 to type 2 muscle fibers, 50%, up to 50% more myoglobin in the type 1, right? And when you're dealing with an athlete that might have a dramatically different composition of type 1 to type 2, let's say you're dealing with a middle distance runner or an 800-meter runner, how you train them and how they respond to that interval is going to be completely different, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So like whenever you did such a good job of overlaying, the differences of HIIT and the different categories of HIIT, it starts to open up more doors for coaches to understand, okay, even within these specific categories of HIIT, how an athlete responds to one category, there's another whole door open, right? There's and I think this is a job that you've done in some of your research with Gareth Sanford, I believe. Yeah. And the ASR, right? So that was kind of his thoughts around, is there a different way we could be approaching training a very specific event or an athlete in a specific event, because they are inherently different, right? We can provide stimuluses to all of the group, or we can selectively, divide the group and start to apply some of these stimuluses more or less depending on, their inherent qualities, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a big one, and a real important one. So ASR, anaerobic speed reserve, or APR, anaerobic power reserve. Now, this is really just what we're describing is really a phenomenon that we see in individuals when we look at different. You lay 10 elite athletes in front of you, and they might all have a similar VO2 max, say, for example, but they often all have a different ASR, APR. In other words, or at least a different maximal sprinting speed or a maximal peak power output. And that really comes back to a lot of Phil Bellinger's work, who started showing how, and others, who really started showing, the animal that's in front of you in terms of their makeup of their slow versus fast twitch muscle fibers really makes a difference. And it's likely that our twitchy, fast twitch guys, they're the ones with the big, peak power outputs or maximal sprinting speeds. They can really go, but they also they might have a lower, slow twitch fiber muscle makeup as a result of that, and therefore they can really bury themselves, but they are screwed kind of right after that, right? Conversely, the slow twitch animal, the diesel, we call them, the diesel engine just kind of keeps going and going, laden with, slow twitch muscle fibers. Well, they can probably, maybe they might be able to repeat that a little bit better, sort of thing, or they might be able to hold on to those long intervals a little bit better. But we believe this split explains a lot of the different responses that we see to a given blanket HIIT session. Again, back to where we sort of started, right?
Yeah.
Tuesdays, it's HIIT training. Everyone gets the same HIIT session, but you're going to see massively different responses across those 10 athletes that we put in front of us. And a lot of the ASR stuff that we're working on. We're actually in the midst right now of putting a course together. It might even be available by the time this is released. But yeah, check out HIIT Science. But we're actually putting a whole course on this. We actually have, like, I call him like the grandfather of the anaerobic speed or power reserve, and that is Peter Weyand. He leads off with the science of it, and then we got Dejo Sanders, who's doing the cycling version. Martin's doing the team sport version, but it's going to be an awesome course, and it's really going to lay all this sort of stuff out there for coaches and scientists out there that really want to understand the individualization. And this is really where you can refine programs to really get the most out of those athletes, because you just given that Tuesday HIIT session, and it's like throwing the spaghetti against the wall and seeing, hopefully one sticks, right? I'm sure you've heard that before.
Oh,
and it's
100%.
just, there's a better road to Rome, eh? So
yeah, that reminds me a lot of people of really in the weightlifting world and resistance training, the Bulgarian method, where these guys would go to max pretty much every day. They're training several times a day, and people think this is somehow applicable to the everyday athlete, weekend warrior, where yes, these guys had unlimited athletes to plow through and an enormous amount of drugs to sustain that type of volume and intensity. But yeah, actually, you brought up Phil Bellinger Griffiths. Him and his group are actually, they're doing some really, really good work and trying to understand, how do these things actually play out in the real world? How does the athlete respond depending on, the typology of the fiber? I think they're using magnetic resonance spectroscopy, I believe. Yeah, and that's great. Like, hopefully this stuff starts to trickle down over the years. But yeah, what they've shown, like even with the overreaching stuff, right? So not even just the session itself, the overreaching, the functional overreaching, it's, not every athlete is going to respond to whether you even go and diversify from the HIIT session itself, but also the frequency of those HIIT sessions are going to play a role.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all this stuff. When you start digging down the rabbit hole, you pull the string, you start to realize, oh, wow, really, there's so much here to be gained from. And I hope it doesn't go out there and put off some coaches because it seems like there's too much to, this thing and the next thing, and I have to get this and I have to heart rate. Oh, there's too much. But realistically, this is going to make your life easier in the long run, because once you establish these things, once you establish a protocol behind these things and they're just a button you press, then things actually become much easier than banging your head against the wall, wondering, did I do the right thing for my athlete, right? Because I'm sure you've spent many years as a coach yourself banging your head against the wall, wondering, did I make the right call there? Did I make the right call? Is this why he got injured, or is this why, he didn't perform?
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, I've made all the mistakes for sure. Yeah. Again, with my own coaching and stuff, done. But yeah, I mean, I think you need to do that as a coach. You actually need to go out there. You have to take chances. You have to try things, but you do learn quite quickly, it doesn't, that method of just giving the blanket session that sits in your training plan calendar, and you just give it to X athlete. Well, it won't always work, right? So there might be reasons, and there might be a better way ahead to design the session better.
Yeah, going through your research, really, it's quite amazing the amount of paths that you're on, whether it's heat adaptation, whether it's obesity with film athetome. I know some of the work you've done there. Low carb, high fat, hyperhydration stuff. There's like anything I've ever questioned, I think under your name and ResearchGate, there is a paper on it. If you go look at Paul Laursen's ResearchGate and look at the papers he's been a part of, there's so many things out there. Beta hydroxybutyrate. What are some of the things that out there you've seen with the research you've been a part of that maybe have surprised you, or maybe have, come up where they completely ran the opposite direction of your hypothesis, right? Like, I know
Yeah.
some of these things that you do in the field are new, so you're obviously going to run into some alternate conclusions,
Oh,
right?
oh yeah. Well, I mean that's the story of my life, really. Like
Yeah.
everything. Like it starts. It really started with Tim Noakes, and I know Tim's, a bit controversial, but he's in a good way, right? Like that's what
Yeah.
science is about. We're supposed to be, we're supposed to be challenging and considering and changing beliefs. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So he's done that for me, and I've really been fortunate to even collaborate with him on a couple things. But then it started with the hydration work that we did back in when the industry Gatorade was really pushing the whole premise that you needed to drink. You couldn't rely on thirst. Don't trust your thirst.
Yeah.
And that was really the first one. And it's like, you had to drink to body weight loss. That was and they're massive amounts they were recommending. And, I was going to sports science conferences, of course, all sponsored by Gatorade, but it was like, that was what we were hearing. And then I just, well, that was actually causing problems, right? Because that was causing hyponatremia, right? You basically dilute
Waterlogged.
you're waterlogged, exactly,
Yeah.
right? Tim did the whole book on it and stuff. So you can really kill yourself actually, right? With that advice. So it almost became a bit personal. And this is, I take myself back to the triathlon days. This is what I believed this crap as well, right? And I would go against my own intuition, and I'd be sitting there doing an Ironman, and I would just be trying to down the Gatorade, right? To try to keep up with the recommendations. And it was so much so that you'd read in magazines from pros, you should always be drinking enough so that you're always vomiting up some during the race, right? So I'd be sitting there on the bike in the aero position, and I'm just like, and just like that was for 10 hours, and that's just what I thought was what you're supposed to sort of do.
Yeah.
We believe this stuff especially when we're told by those of authority we feel are of authority, and we don't trust our own intuition, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that was really where I started to contribute to some of the hydration area, and that was the first one. And we showed a lot. We went deep with a lot of our research to show that really does appear that if we listen to the thirst centers in the brain, if we're really truly listening, we can drink to thirst, and probably we're probably better off doing that than any sort of set rate. You don't want to kind of go one way or the other, but your thirst center's there to keep you on track. The second one, of course, was again Tim Noakes, and Tim totally reversed on his whole stance about carbohydrates. And again, he was pushing sugar and carbohydrates, and then developed high blood pressure, a gut, and then reversed that. And he was pre-diabetic. I was as well. I was working in New Zealand at the time in the Olympic program, and I was following the guidelines in terms of the carbohydrates, still doing Ironman triathlons in my older age, but it was that was just having way too much carbohydrates in the form of sugar. Ultimately, it's really the sugar that derails us, and the processed food. Those are the big players. When you go back towards whole food, you kind of solve a lot of these things, but that wasn't what the industry guidelines were, right? And you had to hit your 90 grams per hour, and again, so that's another big one, especially one that I tend to use with a lot of the athletes that I work with, where they come to me and we hammer down on the nutrition program first, and that makes just a massive difference. Yeah. When they start eating, whole foods, and ultimately getting all the nutrients that they need through whole foods, and often it's really pulling away from the sugar and the processed. It solves just a myriad of issues. So that was another one. I've learned so much from Martin with the whole high intensity interval training stuff. Heart rate variability has been a real fun one too to go down. Done a lot of work with that with Dan Plews and Martin in that area, and really just how you can use that as a tool to look at the load response, and really pick out some of that individuality stuff. Those lots of different areas and lots of mistakes along the way. Did it all wrong, and but it's been fun.
Yeah, that's it's crazy because to me, thinking about just what you can learn from one of those rabbit holes, there's so many offshoots of just one of those, but I couldn't imagine having all of these investigations under my belt, trying to the picture would be a lot clearer, I think, for a lot of people if they went out there and it, regardless of their reading down that path hole, but if you're actually investigating down that path hole, it would just be, it'd be nice for everyone just to have that in their pocket, right? But yeah, no, that was great. And I think you did a good job kind of delineating there too between the processed sugar and whole foods, because I think that's a point that a lot of people, it's a very,
Oh yeah.
it's a very easy point that people gloss over. And we know, like with some of the research and stuff Lustig has put out there, Robert Lustig, really digging into how does the body actually process fructose versus some of these glucose and these things, right? So there is a different stressor on the body, and it's just another stressor when you're training so many hours a week, right? We have to manage all these. This is good. So I'd like to talk a little bit too about the Athletica software that you guys are offering, because this is actually an interesting topic. I was talking with Colleen Moore the other day, and we were talking about we never got into it, but we were discussing a little bit briefly about some of these new softwares out there, and are they going to be replacing some of the physiological testing that we do with athletes? Not for in terms of getting specifically what's going on under the hood. I don't think we'll ever replace that through software, but I think some of these things serve as great proxies. And how many coaches out there have $20,000 sitting in their back pocket for a metabolic analyzer to, have an athlete come test in every week or what I mean? Not every week, but every couple of weeks. Or maybe athletes don't want to do their HRV every morning. Whatever it is, like there's so many pathways that you can go to try and manage all these factors and variables and parameters. But what some of these softwares are doing is taking some of the very basic ones and doing a really good job of whittling them down. And because there's such a large data capture from so many people, that it does get much more accurate as we go along, right? So yeah, I'd like you to just kind of spin off of, what are you trying to put out there? What are you trying to help with folks by, putting this out on the market?
Yeah, well, it's just basically that. It's like it's my ultimately my life's work of experiences trying to make it to put it into a product for people. But it's Athletica is the technology offshoot of HIIT science. So it basically you can apply the HIIT science principles as an athlete or a coach. So we have it in currently for it's ultimately an AI coach, and it is if you want to do like a triathlon, say for example, then you just plug in your race date, and if it's within 7 months, and you choose your approximate ability, whether you think you're a beginner, low volume, middle of the road, mid volume kind of individual, or high volume like elite, or towards elite. Well, you just plug that in, and boom. I mean, basically, we use like the standard expert template plans based on our collaborators and that we've put together, coupled with Bannister's fitness and fatigue modeling. So Bannister, if you might know, was Simon Fraser University, 1970, did basically the whole fitness, fatigue, and freshness model. So that's in the back end, ultimately a modified version of that. And then to your point, Matt, about the testing the invisible monitoring, the invisible testing ultimately. Well, yeah, we do all of that too. We do like critical speed and critical power modeling based simply using your wearable data. So you're out there just training using the session, and if you're uploading your power, your speed, your heart rate, well, lo and behold, we basically got your lab result sitting right in front of you in the terms of your critical power curve and your critical speed curve. So that's just sitting there just from training itself, and it's within 3% of a laboratory test. So is that probably good enough? Well, yeah, probably good enough. Who's gonna, you're not. It's within the degree of of error that's certainly acceptable to give us an insight into what into helping you, knowing how you're making changes and giving you a good prediction on where things are sitting at. Mm-hmm. So that's been really fun to kind of put those in place. And then and it's just, we're going to keep building that out, adding more sports. And then the big one this is a real so all those things that we started with we're talking about the physiologically designed sessions. Mm-hmm. Well, that's like in other words, I want a HIIT session that gives me a low anaerobic response, or I want a HIIT session that gives me a good a solid anaerobic response. Well, we have that as well. So that's in the form of what we call our training drill library, and that gets programmed in as well. And just to before we stop here, I need to be very clear that coaches need not feel threatened. There's a coach version for this as well, right? That we had to start with an athlete version, which is live right now, but we're currently beta testing the coach version, which is super cool. I'm coaching 13 athletes on it right now. I'm actually not even using Training Peaks. So Training Peaks is the platform that I've been using in the past, not even using it anymore. So that's sort of where we're at. And it's doing a superior job. Basically, it can coach all my athletes for me. I'm using the communication portal. So I understand the context. So I can help click and drag and move the sessions around in accordance with the context. Because context is the key, right? So I can design my own sessions as well. If there's like a standard Tuesday night session, I can put that one in. If there's a Wednesday night crit, I can put that in. Master swim class, I can put that in for whatever it may be, right? There's a lot of versatility and flexibility within the software. So that's Athletica. It's been being designed for 8 years, believe it or not. That's how long and it's only been on the market for about 1 year. We're just my next meeting, in fact, is with an investor. So it's that's kind of sort of where we're at.
Nice. Yeah, because it's funny that you brought that up. Coaches shouldn't feel threatened by this stuff. Realistically, this stuff really does help enhance your practice as a coach. I used to spend some time, I was a meteorologist, technologist for a while. And, a lot of people in that field were really worried that the automation was going to take over our jobs. But what a lot of people realized was we were enhanced in doing our jobs because of a lot of the automation, right? Where we could go and just pull up everything basically on our satellites, our radars, and have everything basically printed out what exactly is going on with the weather at this moment, right? Rather than having to go outside. But we still had to monitor, like when you're talking about switching things around, providing context, we still had to go out and monitor what was going on outside. We had to understand the opacity, cloud cover, all this stuff, right? Well, what was going on with the pressures over the last, because inherently these systems aren't perfect. They just make your life 10 times easier in a lot of ways, right? So you can focus on the right things. So I think a lot of coaches kind of maybe need to understand that, wouldn't it be better that I spend my times on things that are less objective, right? Because these hard metrics are quite objective. And I can spend my times in the things that are more subjective and provide better value as a coach. We're seeing how good these things are with some of the research I've seen from the data captures from Strava and critical speed, critical power, and estimating, right? These things, it's coming out there. We're starting to realize, wow, these things are actually really good at what they do.
They are, especially with the large data sets, like you said.
Yeah. So
Pretty powerful.
yeah, it is. It is. So moving into, want to talk about maybe some of the courses that you have too, because, you know, looking through your stuff, you seem to have a lot to offer there. And I think there's huge benefit for people buckling down, from anyone in the field that has spent the amount of time that you have, and just taking some time and honing in on that individual and what they have to offer. Right. A lot of people, I think now with, you know, Instagram and these things, they get kind of scattered. They see one thing and they jump to the next thing. I'm victim to it myself sometimes. You hear this new guy in a podcast, what, I never heard, and you're all over the place. You're like a squirrel, right? Um, but I really do like, you know, I think it's great if people don't want to read a textbook. You know, someone went out there and built a course just for you. I think courses are a great way for, you know, coaches and whoever to learn. Um, so maybe it'd be cool to hear like what are the courses that you have to offer, and you know what's in those kind of.
Yeah. Cool. So it's the main course is ultimately the book wrapped up in a course, like you say. So it is the science and application of high intensity interval training. So 10 chapters, we outline all of the principles, the key principles that you'd need to know to understand HIIT thoroughly. And it's all the things that we just sort of talked about, right? With the physiological targets, the how you move the levers of the intensity and duration of the work bout, the intensity and the duration of the rest bout, and what that causes in your HIIT session that you're designing, including load and load response. Phil Maftone does a health chapter. Jackson Fife does a concurrent training, right? You gotta have strength training in many programs as well. So we outline all of those in the science chapters. And then there's 20 application chapters, so 20 different sports, 20 different experts that come in and explain. These guys are like, the best of the best, right? So if it's if it's NFL gridiron football, it's like, it's the New England Patriots. If it's basketball, well, it's a collaboration between the OKC Thunder and the Spurs teams, and it's like on and on it goes. It's the best of the best, those that are working in there. So yeah, and it's basically so 20 different chapters, and they explain how they actually go in and apply it. So you can have the whole kit and caboodle. You can have the whole course, like all 20 I guess practitioners along with the science. You can have those individual courses, so all the 20 different sports. I'm sure you'd find your sport in there. And then recently, Joseph Coyne has come in and done a improving maximal sprinting speed course. Now, Joseph has cut his teeth with like some of the best sprinters in the world. So, and of course, top speed is so critical to so many different sports. So Joseph's come in and he explains, he basically gives his career in that world in a course, which is really cool. Improving stride length, improving stride rate, great videos and whatnot to actually, like, with drills and those sorts of things, take you through a systematic process and how you'd get more speed out of your athlete. And then, as we spoke on as well, we're currently putting together the anaerobic speed and anaerobic power reserve course as well, with some of the best in the field. And you can use that across your individual cycling, running sports, and, as well as team sports, with Martin doing that version. So lots of different stuff.
That's yeah, that is wide ranging. I think I said this the other day, but I think it's crazy that people go and people think like I might be trying to sell something here, but realistically, I think it's crazy that people just give away so much information for a little. And obviously, they're selling it to multiple people. I get it; they're getting value back to them. But I think about some of the things that I've had to go out there and learn in different sports, and to just give all that information away for a few dollars. It's crazy, because I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand, like, they might see a book or a course out there and they don't really understand how hard earned all that information that they're portraying to you, and the best way that they can. I think it's great that people, you're seeing a push more towards this, right? Courses, books, in the industry. it's good because there has been a lot of misconceptions out there surrounding endurance sport. Like you said, it had this start where it's just like hammer on, right? Hammer on. But it's good now that people that have really been doing the underlying investigations are getting their stuff out there in different contexts. Because before, unless you read research, you weren't going to figure anything out, right? Because you're going to read some book from a guy that's, I don't know, he coaches good people, but does he really know what he's, what is it there? Did they have just good athletes? Yeah. Anyways, something I wanted to get your opinion on, since we're talking about like, adaptations and different responses is, this pyramidal polarized, kind of debate stuff going out there in the popular media right now. But, I'd be interested to hear, because you seem to understand quite intimately, some of the different responses that we're seeing from different interventions. So I think you'd have a good take on, what do you think the applications to both of these are? What do you think the, differences are? Is it a blanket slate, polarized, right? Or whatever?
The overall answer is context, unfortunately. It's really, really depends on the context. So think about your, so the what we're talking about here, first of all, is this model of your weekly or monthly. It depends on how you assess it. But basically, how much time are you spending at work above your aerobic threshold, your VT1, versus work above your VT2, maximal lactate steady state. And through those, you can have what's called a polarized profile, where you've got the bulk of your 80%, say for example, of your training below your aerobic threshold, and then 20% above your with that mid zone to high intensity zone, versus a pyramidal profile that you just described, which might look more like a pyramid, where it's like, a little bit more of the workload is now within the mid zone and the high intensity zone. And finally, you've also got the threshold model, where the bulk, you almost see like the bulk is right in the mid zone. And all different types of, I guess, planning strategies, or post hoc strategies. Ultimately, when you're looking backwards at those, they all have shown success in different contexts. So, for example, like a marathon runner might have a very successful, result. And this is, I was speaking to Andy Jones and Paul Radcliffe, he worked with. She used a threshold model, right, and to set the women's world record at the time, 2:15. But then we see a lot of our Ironman triathlete, and the Ironman triathletes who, they tend to have like more of a pyramidal type response when it's closer to the actual event itself, because so much of that race they need to prepare in that mid zone as well. And though they won't be doing as much in the low zone. But you look at a Olympic distance triathlete, they really need to protect their high intensity sessions, their VO2 max type sessions, if you want to call it. So speaking to Alistair Brownlee, who's and they have to do like the bulk. They have to do a lot of aerobic training, which tends to be probably almost 80 to 90% below that aerobic threshold. But then when they hit the track or their HIIT session, they're tearing their legs off with it, right? Yeah. And that's really what their profile looks like. So the simple answer is really context. They all work in different contexts, and with different individuals. Probably coming back to the Billinger fiber type stuff, probably all relates to that too.
Yeah, to me, it feels like the argument can be a little bit oversimplified sometimes. And even in the paper, that just came out, I don't want to insult anyone by saying that, but I feel like there's a lot of nuance there. Like right off the bat, if we're talking about what is your race pace, where does your race pace relate to the intensities that you're training at? Is there a difference between training 35 hours in a week, 35 hours a week on a bike versus 12 hours running? Is there a difference there? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't hear a lot of that in the conversation. It just seems insane to me that there's one way, like it's interesting that people have that perspective. And I mean, I think, maybe what seems to kind of come out a little bit is if you realize the type of people that are on the argument of one side, they generally deal with a certain type of an athlete where that might be
Sure.
a more common route that would be beneficial versus, yeah. Anyways, it's good to hear, some middle ground there. And you don't hear, it's either you hear both, you hear like people on both, or people just so hardcore down one path. And I don't know. I think, it would do everyone service to just kind of realize that maybe the people that are saying both have something, you know, to say, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes down to ego, really. And Martin, my colleague Martin Bichette, did this great little book on ego. So e-goals, I think it's called. And yeah, and so much of it, like sport, is just sport and academia, and just life in general. We're all ego-driven, egomaniacs, right?
Yeah.
And like you get, and you'll do anything you can to protect that ego and your belief system.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think for all of us, we really have to be careful about that. And if we can just step back a little bit and look within, and really, this is what we're supposed to be doing with science. Does the data really say that? Can we start to sit back and just really like using our slow thinking brains and just sit down and really objectively look at that phenomena that might be we're trying to kind of piece together outside, and you know park the ego for a moment and what your current belief systems are, and open your mind to looking at other things. I think that's really a helpful, I don't know, process or mind flow to kind of consider.
Yeah. That's actually a good way of putting it. And it's kind of like the Silicon Valley phrase, like fail forward, fail faster. Like you should be looking to. I know with myself, I don't consult with very many people, but when I do, it's to have my preconceived notions or hypotheses shattered. When I go out to, consult with someone, I really do think, you should be trying to fracture some of these frameworks in your head, because I think you just get to the point you're looking for faster. Um, it's different cultures, hold different type of egos to them in some ways. Like some ways, they shift between different sports and different fields. But yeah, just in the endurance sport and some of these things, they're very like conservative, and they're very traditional. Like we have to respect this thing because it's been around for a long time. Um, just like I know John Colley's work has been quite disruptive of periodization. What are we talking about there? Does it mean anything? But yeah, we have to keep in mind that a lot of these people have gained these preconceived notions from experience too. So we have to kind of always keep the ear open. But yeah. So moving into some of your specific coaching, like what kind of athletes do you coach? What kind of stuff have you changed in your own coaching practice over the years? Like, is there things that you've become more bullish on, whether that's resistance training or maybe a shift in how you load the athletes, or is there anything that's shifted over the years? And what are the types of athletes that you work with?
Well, I work mostly with triathletes, but
Mm-hmm.
I've worked also with endurance athletes,
Mm-hmm.
both runners and cyclists. And no surprise, those are the plans that are in Athletica, right?
Yeah.
Is you can get cycling, running, and triathlon plans are in Athletica currently. So, but then I'm also working right now. I'm using Joseph's course on HIIT Science, and I'm coaching a sprinter right now too, which is really fun.
Nice.
And it's kind of, I'm out of my own comfort zone, which is really cool. I encourage individuals to take these chances, because you can learn that way. But mostly like elite triathletes, like so Andy Busher is one of the world's top Ironman triathletes. I'm his coach. And I've coached a slew of others, and mistakes made, loads. I mean, some of the ones we spoke on, using a blanket type of session to, always use that session. So don't do that. You have to kind of go out there and learn what, about your athlete. But yeah, so that's one. I've really learned. I was speaking to Olav Alexander Boo, who's Christian Blumenfeld's coach. I was speaking to him the other day, and we were talking together about how the response to any given session in these big units that are like some of the guys that are the best in the world, they're completely different. When these guys bury themselves, when you tell them, you prescribe out there to these guys to bury themselves in a session, whether it's mid zone or high intensity zone, they go deep. They go deeper than any of us that aren't at that level can really appreciate. And correspondingly, they break even. They don't break entirely, but they're gone for the next few days. Like you've really broken your flow of training in them. So I've learned that the hard way in a bunch of different athletes. Thinking, we've got to do these really key sessions, to prepare for the race that might be kind of coming up. And then I've really interrupted that flow as a result, because I've been too anxious, and they have too, right, to kind of get these big sessions out before a key race. So don't do that as much anymore, or at least learn together. The fun thing, though, is I've learned along the way with these guys, and that's really this is again the kind of back to Athletic, we were speaking about the communication portal in it, and this is really where the coach really belongs in my view, and it's having those relationships so you can find out what is really working well for that individual. That's, I believe, still knowing your trade, knowing all this sort of stuff that we're talking about on the podcast here. You still have to know that, but also you need to be I think a people person, and really be a good communicator with that individual as well. I think that's just so vital. All the things we spoke on the podcast are mistakes that I've made along the way, from hydration to diet to the prescription that I've given. Bullish. No, I think I love, I think I'm a big fan of wearables. Everything I'm using right now, I've kind of, you go on a squiggly little path to get there, but it's like everything where I'm at right now, I'm pleased with where I'm at. I'm pleased with what the key things that I'm using. The big rocks to me are the wearables that we are using. We use Garmin and Strava and connect with those. And it's things like your power, your heart rate, your speed of movement, the elevation profile. All these things are sort of the big things to get an insight into the load. Looking at, heart rate variability in the morning is a good thing for any endurance athlete. You're really getting a look at the response to the load of the previous day. And if you're taking it at the same time of day, and we can do this so easily now with things like, it's not that you can wear a ring, you can wear a Whoop band. They're going to be in watches and more very soon. And this will be something that's integrated as well into Athletica. So you can get that load response marker as well. But yeah, that's everything where I've arrived right now. I'm happy with, and yeah. Context is the other big one. So there's no blanket thing. So it's, we've spoken on, low ego and being accepting of change. And, so that's another thing that's been, I think, good to develop along the road as well. And also to hold on to that philosophy right now too. So I'm happy with where things are at, but I'm okay if they change, and that if the data says that it needs to change, then it does. And then we change it, and that's okay.
That's yeah, where you started there with athletes burying themselves. It really it's something that I've noticed too. Is I look at training in a lot of ways as we have certain systems in the body to protect ourselves, to breathe, or protect ourselves to survive in any sense, right? So a lot of training is developing this underlying structure to support the breaking of these switches, right? Like the baroreceptors and mechanoreceptors, GTOs, muscle spindles. We're kind of pushing those levers back so we can kind of attain more of ourselves. And I think with athletes that are extremely developed, those levers are pushed really far back. And prescribing 10 minutes of intensity to an athlete, like let's say, for example, like a sprinter versus a novice individual, those are two totally different stimuluses, even though they might have the same fiber composition. But the ability for that individual, the beginner, to dig in deep into the nervous system and send those outputs really at a high rate, at a high speed, and create the kind of trauma that happens with some of these intenser sports. Yeah, it's just something I've noticed is athletes are really good at digging. Like the good athletes are really good at shutting that part of the brain off and digging deep into the well. But the price to be paid at that is is high, and it's something I've had to learn the hard way too. But yeah, the way you described it there with yeah, he does a lot of work actually with like VO2 Master, Moxie. I've seen him around on some seminars. Yeah, Olaf.
He's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah,
he's yeah, and obviously the work he does with the it's a Norwegian team. Yeah, it's insane. It's really cool.
Yeah, really is.
Yeah, so we'll start getting into some of these final questions that I have for you here.
Sure.
So one thing I'd like to know is we have a lot of technology out there that's quite accessible and a lot that's not, like we talked about MRS earlier, like magnetic. Anyways, we can understand that some of these things will probably be available in the future once development and we catch up. What would be something that's out there right now, whether it's in the medical field, sports performance field, wherever, research field, that if you could extract that, compact it, put it out in the market, use with your athletes, what would that be? And why would you want to do that? Like, what is the significance of that marker to you? Whether it's, muscle fiber typology, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I think the one that's closest to being developed, because I know it's right. I think they've got prototypes that are actually working right now, and it would be a real-time lactate monitor.
Nice.
Because they've got you might know like the Dexcom or Super Sapiens or Libra, these sorts of things. They're doing glucose. But we can do that also with lactate too. And the lactate, I really want to see that happening, and I think that'll be it might just open a few sort of doors on some of our training process. Remember, lactate's not it's not a nauseous byproduct, right? Like if anything's going to be actually like signaling for anything sort of negative, it would be the hydrogen ion, but the lactate it tends to signal for other beneficial things, right? Like there's like even like there's aerobic signaling properties that actually happen with lactate. So amongst many others, it's a positive kind of thing that happens out there. But there's just so many different ways that we could potentially use that, from different sets, different sessions, nutritional interventions that we could kind of look at with the lactate response. So I'm really excited for that. I know it's not too far, and soon we will have that. And that it'll probably be curbed alongside some of these products like Super Sapiens, Dexcom, etc. And you'll just as opposed to just having the real-time blood glucose that on your phone, you'll also, and your monitor, you'll have glucose and lactate at the same time. I think that'll be soon. and there'll be the typical, lag time. There'll be lots of error, and we'll compare it with, the gold standard ones, and there'll be, but eventually that error will get lower and lower, and it'll be more acceptable, and we'll delve into more individual understanding of some of these, twitchy versus diesel guys. Some of the discussion we were having, also on bearing athletes. It's just going to be super interesting. So I think if I had to pick one that's on the radar, that's not too far away, that's high on my list right now.
Yeah, I've seen a couple papers on this, and I like almost got a little bit anxious. I'm like, if this is coming soon, can someone just please notify me so I don't miss it?
You won't miss it. It'll make some noise. Someone's going to do it soon.
I'm interested, actually. I'll ask Andre, because I know I'm interested to hear his thoughts. Andre Feldman, because he started testing lactate when he was like a teenager with Jurg. Like he was like a kid, I guess. He was out there testing lactate. So I'd like to hear his thoughts on that, because I think a lot of people, like you said, first of all, they misunderstand lactate, and they also, there's this other group that understands lactate and understands, yeah, it's not the demon, and utilization and recycling, but they still don't see any value in lactate testing. And I'm like, I just think you might not be, just you're not grasping what you can get from lactate. Like, yes, it's a systemic marker, it's not coming directly from the muscle tissue, but it's still a great tool. Like, I don't know, and it's, for me, how cheap it is, and I don't know, there's just so many things about it. I'd be excited to see if there was a continuous, right, like feed of that. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard anyone say that yet, but so we can talk about this one, because one of them we already kind of went through. But when it comes to the black box, like, banging our head against the wall, I think I know where you might go with this, but maybe not in the beginning. But where do you start with an athlete? Like, when you get an athlete show up at your door, saying, hey, train me, I want to become whatever, X Ironman champion, where do you start? Like, do you start with training logs? Do you start with testing? Do you start with, how do you shrink the black box to prescribe training intervention?
Yeah, great question. And like, I'm not sure if we've got a podcast as well, and it's the key question we ask every single one of our guests, right? So it's Training Science Podcast. So we've had 20 guests on there so far, and with that, it's the key question we ask for all of these world experts. And I can only steal, but I believe what they kind of do, and it's really getting to know that athlete first. So we've had some of our guests on there that they'll go out for a run or a bike or a swim with that individual first. And why do you do that? Well, you do that because you are making that athlete feel at home. They're in their home environment. They can likely beat you at those, any of those sorts of disciplines. And they'll open up to you a lot more as a result of that. And then you might, like you said, you might go in and have a look at their training diaries if they have that. You find out what their goals, are, and where they kind of want to go with things, and you see sort of what are their methods to date. Are they into wearables? Have they monitored these things in the past, or are they scared of wearables? So where do they sort of sit on that, and can you bring them towards your philosophy, whatever that might be? And probably you don't want to throw a whole kit and caboodle at them right from day one, but maybe there's, just get to know them as people first and foremost. You got to become a little bit like, there needs to be a line between the coach and the athlete, but you've got to be a bit friendly with them as well. And the more you will do that, the more you can make a difference in their lives. And that's really what it's all about. That's what we all want to do. If we're a coach, we care about our athletes. And, if you're not caring about your athletes, you're probably in the wrong profession, I would think. So that's about it.
Yeah, that's true. Like, sometimes we care a little bit too much. It comes back to bite us, right? Like, the stress of that.
Well, yeah. And, but I think that's part of being a coach, is like, and I you should feel, if you are connected, you should feel somewhat, if they have a bad day, you should feel kind of bad with them.
Mm,
That's, I do. So I really want, and I'm very used to that too. Like that's
mm,
just, I'm going to take that emotional ride with those athletes when they have a bad day too. That's my job. I
mm.
have to do that because I care about their performance. I want them to have a good performance.
That's something actually, like when you brought up, going out there and putting them in their element. I don't think I mean, I'm sure other coaches may do that, but I've never heard someone actually verbally say that, which is something that I have noticed that when someone, reaches out to you for coaching, or maybe someone got referred to you or whatever it is, in the beginning, there's this like fear, especially with some of the athletes that aren't really deep into the physiology or deep into, the training science. And there's this like friction there where they feel like you're just going to come in and like, throw everything on its head, and they're not going to know enough, or they're not going to understand this or that. And there's this kind of like, low level anxiety of dealing with this person that they think is, just going to come and start talking about, threshold this and FTP that. And realistically, it's like just talking to them and as a human being, and just being like, hey, I'm a human being. I'm not this like, guy that sits behind a microscope all day or something. I don't know what, but it is something that people carry over whenever they reach out for coaching. Or even dealing with other coaches. I see that resistance there too, where they feel like you may somehow undermine them, by some of the work that you do, or some of the stuff that you pay attention to. Right. And there's kind of that
Mhm.
friction there. Like, I know sports scientists and team sport, coaches, that's like a very common thing in the field, is like getting that to mesh, because the coach is just like, oh, it's all strategy, and the sports scientist is like, it's all physiology, like, and the coach is like, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't want you touching anything to do with my team. And you see that friction there. And realistically, if they were just to start off on maybe a different foot of like, hey, let's go out for a beer, or let's go out for a coffee, and
Oh
and
yeah.
get them into their field, or get them into their zone, and that would break down a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, break down a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah, but
barriers.
that's the number one thing. So yeah, if you're a performance specialist, and you're entering that, you're entering the coach's territory. Well, you better get on their ground, and you better, yeah, go have a beer with them, go have a coffee with them, whatever it may be, right? But you
Mhm.
go, go onto the field with them, and yeah, you've got to keep your ego low and learn from them first, spend time with them first, get to know them before you're going to be able to, and get them to trust you before you offer too much about what you can kind of make, some suggestions you may have, say for
Yeah,
example. Yeah.
yeah. So moving into, basically the one that I'm really interested to hear is, if you could only use one test, whether that's like critical power, maybe FTP testing. Let's just stick to cycling. Cycling is an easy one, not swimming and running. But yeah. So if you can only use one test, whether it's maybe a VO2 max test, submaximal cycling test for like economy or efficiency, what would it be that, you think would be a great one to hone in on for 3 to 5 years with an athlete, and you think you could really dig down the rabbit hole and maybe uncover some things, or just get a lot of value out of?
Yeah, it's an easy one. So that was another great collaboration that I was able to be part of as Mark Quad's PhD supervisor with David Martin, Jim Martin, and it's the Quad Power Profile Test ultimately. And
Okay.
it's, in 1 hour you can ultimately get a power profile. You can get both, levels of your anaerobic sprinting neuromuscular power on the bike, all the way down to your, a good marker of both VO2 max and threshold. So the test basically goes like two all out 6 second sprints, followed by a rest period. And then I think there's a 15-second sprint. There's a 30-second sprint. There's a 1 minute sprint. There's a 4 minute sprint. These are all done all out right across the whole thing. And the final one is a 10 minutes, 10-minute all out session. the 4-minute bout corresponds with your VO2 max. You get your anaerobics markers from the former ones.
Mm-hmm.
The sprinting abilities will show up there. And then you get a good marker of your, call it your critical power through the 10-minute one as well. So you ultimately wind up getting a real sweet critical power curve from it that isn't going to be too far off. Mm-hmm. But and you can get all of that, of course, just by using Athletica as well. just to throw that in there. So invisible monitoring, invisible testing.
That's a unique test. I haven't heard of that one actually specifically. I've heard of the 5, 20, where they start off with a short effort, 30-second, I think, then 5-minute, 20-minute, I think.
Sure.
But yeah, that one's interesting. I actually have to look into that one because it sounds slightly different and could hold probably some different metrics there that might be useful.
Yeah, 2010 International Journal of Sports Medicine, and Mark Quad is the lead author on that. Yeah, and we did that when he was working at the Australian Institute of Sport with Cycling Australia. So and that's tested on the under 23 program there. So all the big units that were under 23s at that time.
Okay. So moving into central peripheral, I've heard people go out there kind of like the pyramidal polarized, state that, all elite athletes are peripherally limited, or, I've heard other people say it's all central. Elite athletes are all central. I don't know what people are talking about. In your experience, what do you think? Is it both? Is it central? Is it peripheral? Does it depend?
I don't know. I don't know if anyone really knows, but some of the ones, I've forgotten the author names, but some of the ones that would tend to make me think it's a little bit more central are the ones where the studies where basically when there's more oxygen that is all of a sudden supplied to a muscle, there's a greater uptake in it. There's a few studies, there's some rat studies with that as well. The other phenomenon would be the fact that blood doping and EPO use seems to work as well, right? So those are almost delivery aspects. When we're supplying more oxygen to the muscles, it can take it up. So that would tend to tell me that it's a little bit more centrally driven, and again, why I think we need to probably, this is again one of the big needs for HIIT training in the optimized program, I believe, of any athlete, is you need to sort of have a blend of these long, slow distance trainings below the aerobic threshold, but you equally need to be working on that delivery. And this is why the polarized training method tends to work well, is because we should be trying to really get protect those high intensity sessions, do them well, good quality, so you get the big VO2 max benefits ultimately, so that you're improving the ventricular contractions, improving the stretch of the myocardium, et cetera, and the associated recoil. So I think I'm more of a central guy, but there's got to be some peripheral uptake happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's so many aspects to it, right? There's so many aspects. I love hearing everyone's opinion, because every time there's someone hits on something different slightly.
Sure. But here's the thing. Are we, where does it matter?
Yeah, that's the thing.
What matters is performance, right?
Yeah.
What's the performance looking at? That's what I care about. So, maybe it matters because it will influence, that understanding will influence how we go about our practice.
Yeah.
But I really, I care about the athletes and real coaches aren't going to care too much about this debate. This is more of an academic kind of debate. And that's our job, right?
Sure.
If we're an academic, that's our job to kind of debate that. But let's, performance matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, because regardless of what side of the question or what side of the answer you're on, regardless of the interventions for both of those, they're going to end up in the same place anyways, right? It's
Yeah.
not like one cycling team is like pulling out VO2 maxes in the hundreds and everyone else is, because they
Yeah.
figured out some. Everyone's ending up in the same area, maybe, if you're in that level, anyways.
Exactly.
So the last thing I'd like to just get your opinion on, or hear about, sorry, is what are some interests you have outside of sports science, outside of physiology, these things? Like what areas are you interested in? Whether it's just you learning or hobbies, activities, stuff that you do.
Yeah, well, I love reading. I love reading outside my area, whether it's professional development. I'm very interested in fungus right now.
Oh,
So
nice.
and mushrooms. They just it's a whole other branch of life that we've really kind of thought. It's a whole other kingdom ultimately.
Yeah.
And I live here, kind of in Revelstoke in BC, which is and all just a real when I'm working in my backyard gardening. I've got like I'm into carpentry a little bit. I've built like a real hack carpenter and whatnot. I like built a little bit of a tree fort for my daughter, and trail building as well as another thing. Mountain biking. You can see the instruments behind me. I've got a piano and a guitar back there. So music, I'm very into it as well. And spending time with my family and continuing to train, swim, bike, and run. Although my running's not very good right now because I've done 17 Ironman, and it's just kind of too many marathons, unfortunately, with hanging out with my buddy Dan Plews and following him around. So less trail running these days, but still a lot of mountain biking, backcountry skiing in the winter time, and yeah, that's about it. Just enjoying the outdoors and trying not to spend too many hours in front of this Zoom screen,
Yeah. We're all doing too much of that lately.
I know, exactly. But yeah, so yeah, I try to balance it with all those other different activities.
It's cool you said you talked about my I used to have a big mushroom operation out of my house. Like I used to grow oyster mushrooms, shiitake, mycology. So I used to go through. Yeah, I had this huge setup, dude. It was pretty
Wow.
elaborate. Yeah, I had a full room full of produce ounces of mushrooms a day.
Oh, it's awesome. I'm
Yeah,
just fascinated by them because it's a whole. It's just been completely for me. It's totally under. I've been in my life. It's just been so off my radar. I didn't even really know they existed too much, except they're in the grocery store. They're the mushrooms. They showed up on my plate every once in a while from mom. But
yeah,
holy mackerel, is like our world is made of it, and it's one of the
insane.
large kingdoms, and it's like it's everywhere, and they're big. They're really important decomposers and all these sorts of things. It's part of our life, and they. I think there's a lot of untapped wisdom that's within those. I'm just trying to learn those.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have some nice hobbies as well outside of that. That's good. Good answer.
Thanks, man.
So really good to have you on today, Paul. Just if anyone wants to go out there and find your stuff, I'll link to it in the show notes.
Thanks.
But if you want to give a shout out to where people can find you.
Yep. Well, you probably heard it. If you've made it this far, you've
Yeah.
probably heard of HIIT Science.
Yeah.
HIITscience.com is the big one. And then Athletica.ai is our technology business. Yeah, if you want to ping me, just go to paullarsen.com and you can use the form there. And I'm on my only social media is Twitter, Paul B. Laursen, if you want to ping me there as well. So those are me.
Awesome. All right, folks. That's all for today.